to Spotlight ETSU. I'm your host, Carrie Oliveira. Today we'll be speaking with Dr. Tess Lloyd about her work on the Appalachian Teaching Project, which focuses on building a sustainable future for Appalachian communities. This year, students are working on promoting sustainable agriculture and preserving Unicoi County's farming heritage. Dr. Lloyd is a professor in the Department of Literature and Language and also teaches in the Department of Appalachian Studies. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Lloyd.
My pleasure.
So happy to have you here. I always like to start these interviews by talking about you and your educational background and how it is that you came to be at ETSU. So how did you come to be at ETSU?
Well, I was fortunate enough when I was finishing up my doctorate at the University of North Carolina to be offered a position teaching in what was then the English department, and it was a position teaching folklore and Appalachian studies. And for me, that was about the perfect position. I have an undergraduate background in anthropology. I did literary studies in graduate school, and so this was a chance to synthesize both of those.
That's exciting. So you got your doctorate at North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Yes.
And then before that, where was your undergrad from?
I got my BA at Duke, and then I also have an MA from Penn State.
In anthropology?
Yes.
Cultural anthropology?
Cultural anthropology, yes.
Oh, that was one of my favorite classes as an undergraduate.
Yes.
I took it just like, to fulfill a humanities requirement, and I was like, oh, this is so cool. I couldn't figure out what I was going to do with it as a career, though.
Well, so you could become an English professor.
I could have become an English professor or study Appalachian communities. And so your job, partly, in addition to, what do you teach in English and Appalachian studies? What are the courses that you teach for us?
Well, in the English department, I teach courses in Appalachian literature and folklore. And in the Appalachian Studies department, well, clearly those courses fit into Appalachian Studies,
right,
which is interdisciplinary. But I've also taught courses in art and Appalachia and current issues in Appalachia, religion in Appalachia. So it's just a very interdisciplinary program. Speaking
of current issues in Appalachia, I suspect that one of the issues that you deal with on a regular basis is the business of farming, and sustainability is one of the issues in Appalachia. And so part of the work that you do is with respect to the Appalachian Teaching Project.
Yes.
And so tell me about that.
Okay. To understand what the Appalachian Teaching Project, or the ATP, is, you need to know that it is funded by the Appalachian Regional Commission. And the Appalachian Regional Commission, or ARC, was founded, it's a government agency, and it was founded back in the 1960s. That was when the rest of the country was discovering that there was poverty in some parts of Appalachia. And so the ARC was funded to address issues of persistent poverty and to stimulate economic development and building of infrastructure in the region. So for a number of years, what the ARC focused on really were sort of straight ahead economic development projects, or building sewer systems, or building roads.
So like physical infrastructure.
Yes, exactly. But there also came a realization that the region has important intellectual and social and cultural capital as well. And so for the past 10 years, what the ARC has done is, one of its many programs is the Appalachian Teaching Project. And what the ATP is designed for is to get students out of the classroom and into the community, synthesizing their academic work with work in the community. What they do is they go out, they work with community leaders, they discover what are important issues to the community, and then they work on those issues. I should say there are 15 universities and colleges that are involved in the Appalachian Teaching Program. ETSU is just one of them,
right,
although we also administer the program.
That's exciting. How did we get the job of administering the program?
Well, it was in part because of the leadership in Appalachian Studies at ETSU. One of the persons that spearheaded the program in the beginning was Dr. Jean Haskell, who was director of Appalachian Studies. And when Dr. Haskell retired, Dr. Roberta Herron, who is now director of Appalachian Studies, assumed the leadership of the ATP and has really helped it grow and become a very solid program.
I think that's so cool. And I wonder, do the other schools that are part of the Appalachian Teaching Project, do they all have programs in Appalachian Studies?
They don't. No, they don't necessarily have programs in Appalachian Studies. Really, there are many departments that can house programs that are relevant to Appalachian Studies. So some of the schools that are in the ATP center their program in the business school or in regional planning departments. So it can, you can really come at these issues from a variety of different academic disciplines.
That makes a lot of sense. And so what then is the primary objective of ETSU's work in the ATP? What kinds of things are you guys working on? And I have notes here regarding, you've had a variety of projects. I have notes from 2009. And you've been working on a variety of things. Primarily, your energy has been focused in Unicoi County, it seems.
Yes, it has been. And since 2006, ETSU has worked with Unicoi County. I was not teaching the course in 2006, but that was when we pioneered our relationship with them. And Unicoi County is really interesting right now. It's a small county just south of Washington and Carter counties. And the question in Unicoi County has been, what direction will development go in? Now, Unicoi County has got, for example, several nuclear facilities.
I had no idea.
Yeah, nuclear fuel services, for example, is there. And so in the early 2000s, there was a proposal to bring yet another nuclear facility into the county. And there were some county leaders who were very supportive of that because, let's face it, today everyone thinks if you're going to grow economically, it has to be through industry and business, And so that seemed to fit that bill. But there were other county leaders who said that what they really needed was something that was more sustainable, something that wasn't threatening to the environment and the people, which nuclear can be, I mean, not necessarily, but it certainly has that potential.
Yeah.
And so what happened was there was just a real change in leadership in the county. And a number of county leaders came in who wanted to promote not industrial development. In fact, they often said that while Washington County at that time had about 100 possible industrial sites, Unicoi County had 5.
Oh.
So they said, we need to think, how can Unicoi County really maximize what it has?
Right.
So we have been working with them on that in a couple of different ways.
So it doesn't seem to me that a county that only has 5 potential industrial sites would be able to make itself economically viable based on industry then. But farming, and we have some numbers here that we're going to talk about, but farming seems to be an increasingly difficult, I don't know, the industry clearly is the wrong word, but an economic force, really. I think farming has become more difficult, especially in an industrial age. And so was it sort of like a rock and a hard place that Unicoi County was between? Either we have very few industrial sites to avail ourselves to, or we have to struggle and try to maintain farming in our community, which may not be the easiest thing in the world to do. That seems like a very difficult challenge.
Well, it's made even more difficult by several things about Unicoi County's geography and its history. First of all, the county is 51% national forest. So that's just out.
I'm learning so much about Unicoi County right now.
That's out for farming. Also, the county is fairly mountainous, so it's not the best topography for farming. And a third thing that makes farming difficult in Unicoi County and throughout all of America is that small family farms have really gone out of business, and they have been supplanted by large farms. We call that agribusiness. And so for a lot of farmers to make their living farming in Unicoi County, that's just not a viable proposition. So what the county has done, though, is to consider how farming could be a part of their economic development. So as they looked around, they said that what they had was beautiful scenery.
Yes.
So tourism, ecotourism is certainly a possibility.
Yes.
They had a rich cultural tradition, which included music and crafts.
Right.
And so actually for 3 years what we did was work with them on promoting the sale of crafts for economic development. And they said they do still have farmland and they have this farming heritage.
Right.
So if you promote agriculture, you preserve beautiful land. Well, that's important in ecotourism. You can actually get agritourism businesses going, and you can stimulate farming as well. I don't think anyone ever believes that farming is going to become a real possibility for economic growth in Unicoi County. But can it supplement a lot of other sustainable initiatives. And the thought there is, yes, it can.
So talk to me about sustainability a little bit. When we talk, and sustainability is something I hear a lot about. I teach public speaking, and so a lot of my students are in the business department, and one of the things that is a big push in the business department is thinking about sustainability in business and whatever else. And so what really is, when we're talking about sustainability, what are we talking about?
Well, we're talking about economic initiatives that don't use themselves up. And I think a really easy way to understand that is to compare what goes on in the coal fields or the extractive industries with sustainable development. After you mine out all the coal,
that's all there is.
That's right.
That's it.
Exactly.
And so we're trying to build an economy then based on things that don't go away.
Yes, yes.
That makes a lot more sense. And it also, long term, it seems like more economically viable when you have a resource that replenishes itself or that you can replenish, as opposed to something that's just going to be gone.
Right.
And that's the end of it. And so in the course of your working with the ATP and working in Unicoi County, what kinds of things have you seen? Have you seen growth? Have you seen development? What about Unicoi County has made it the focus of the ATP? Why Unicoi County as opposed to other places in the region? There's something specific about it. I mean, I realize the challenges that we've already talked about or whatever else, but of Unicoi County, why it?
Why Unicoi County? Well, that's a good question. I think one reason is that early on, we just pioneered a relationship with the leadership in Unicoi County. There are other departments at ETSU that work with Unicoi County as well. For example, Dr. Jean and Ed Stead in the business department for a long time have worked in Unicoi County. And Unicoi County's interests seem to dovetail really well with some of the things that we do here. So I would say that would be the reason.
That makes good sense. I mean, they have a need and we have something we want to teach and whatever else. And so the project that you're working on this year, so we have a history of the ATP projects. And so what is the primary focus of this year's project? So sustainability and agriculture and building farms in Unicoi County is what your guys are going for this year.
Well, yes, and actually this year is a little different from other years because what we have done in the past is to look at people who are working with agricultural initiatives today. So farmers, diversified farmers who grow for a farmer's market or people who are in agritourism and this sort of stuff. Well, what we're doing this year, though, is interviewing people about the history of farming in Unicoi County. And the thought there, how does that fit in with economic development?
Right.
Well, one thing is that there's a sense that preserving cultural heritage is important both for the people, but also there's such a thing as cultural tourism and heritage tourism.
Yes.
So
I think Jonesboro is a really good example of that.
Exactly. It certainly is. So for both of those reasons, then, we decided to focus on history. Plus, it's just important to talk to these older retired farmers while they're still here to tell their stories.
Yes.
So that's what we've been doing, and the goal here is twofold. One is to interview people about the history of farming in Unicoi County, and what will grow out of that is a museum exhibition. We're working with the Carol Reese Museum at ETSU, and we'll have a museum exhibition in 2014, and then we'll be donating panels from that exhibition to Unicoi County to use in one of their locations.
Oh, that's neat. You said that was one goal, was to do interviews. What was the second one?
The second one is the museum exhibition, to stage that exhibition.
Well, I think that's what I love about museums, especially, I love museums in general, and what I love about them is the opportunity to, they document history incredibly well, and I think that there's no better way really to be a person who's apart, away from a culture, and you can go into a museum and get it a feeling for what it's like to be in the culture, and I think that a museum is a delightful idea, and it'll be a nice thing for the Carol Reese Museum to an exhibition for them. So I have some numbers here about farming in Unicoi, and specifically related to the number of farms. And there has been clearly a sharp decline in the number of farms since long, long ago.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've started your interviews with the older farmers yet. Is this something that's ongoing? Do you have data from those interviews yet?
Yes, we are starting to bring that data in.
That's
yes.
so exciting. Are you getting any insight about how they feel about the decline of the farming industry? I mean, aside from the fact that it's probably had a negative economic impact on them, is there any sort of like emotional lamenting over the loss of farming?
In many instances, there is. And people will either say that they wish that they could have continued in, say, their parents' or grandparents' footsteps,
yes.
but it's just not economically viable, they feel, to be farmers today. Or they'll speak nostalgically about, say, how their father feels about the fact that Interstate 26 cut through the family farm. So we are finding that. Yet we also find people who are very proud of, say, their parents' or their grandparents' generation farming, putting 7 kids through college who then went on to have professional careers off the farm. So it's sort of ironic being very proud of the farm, and yet in some instances also being proud of what the farm enabled people to do that took them away from the farm.
Well, that's such an interesting thing culturally, right? So you have, you work, you own a farm, and you work. And I can't imagine farming. I grew up in the suburbs. I have lived in the suburbs my entire life. The idea of farm life terrifies me. I'm much too lazy to be working on a farm, but the idea that you would work that hard so that your kids would be doing something other than working that hard, but in the process of that you lose the farm ultimately, possibly. I mean, you don't have kids to work on it. You have to pay people to manage your farm. Again, becomes economically unfeasible in the long term, I would think. So that's, I think, incredibly interesting. We have a chart here about the number of farms that existed in Unicoi County, and you drew my attention to a couple of years. And so we have data from 1964, between 1964 and 1978. We saw a decline in 303 farms between those years. What do you attribute that to? And is there a way to stop that? Do we have a need to stop that?
Well, what most agricultural historians feel was going on then was...
Is that a specific subfield of history?
Oh, yes, yes. Yes, yes. In fact, Dr. Tom Lee here at the university teaches a course on agricultural history in Appalachia. But at any rate, it's kind of easy to blame the Nixon administration and Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture, Earl Butz, who promoted large farms over small farms. In other words, the goal was basically to get farmers out of business and to consolidate farming in the hands of a few very large farms. Earl Butz's mantra was plant row to row. Don't, plant your whole farm. But it wouldn't be right just to blame them, because they were symptomatic of attitudes in American agriculture and business of the time. Earlier in the 1960s, there had been a study that came out that basically said one of the problems with farming was that there were too many farmers, and people needed to get out of farming. It needed to be consolidated.
Doesn't that create competition, though? Like, I mean, if you have a bunch of farmers, then wouldn't that presumably then keep the price of anything that people are farming competitive?
Well, actually, you farm if you, well, there are other things that are going on there too. So
That's a bigger economic question.
Yeah, we're leaving government subsidies out of here because there were government incentives for either growing or not growing. And so the truth is, it just was financially easier for large farms to take all this over. Plus, farming after World War II became much more chemical fertilizer, much more pesticide, herbicide.
Yes.
So all of these things are working to change what the farm used to be.
What was I'm really curious as to what Butz and Nixon's argument was for creating larger farms was going to have what impact on the economy? It was going to make farm products cheaper. It was going to create efficiency in farming, which then should reduce the cost of farming. Is that what the philosophy was?
Yes, to both of those questions.
Oh. And with no regard to the fact that these farmers are making a living farming their veggies and their cattle and whatever else.
No, not really, because there was a sense that perhaps they could make a better living in terms of participating in the consumer economy if they had other jobs.
So we take farmers off their farms, which is what they know how to do, and we consolidate farms and have those turn into like big box farms.
Yes.
And then we take a farmer who's been farming his whole life and we put him into some other facet of work someplace else and expect him to do as well as if he were farming?
Well, and that was happening even before then. One thing that we're finding in our interviews, and it's just classic, I mean, it can be substantiated in the research, is that the generation before World War II tended to see the farmers living on the farm, farming full time. But the generation just after World War II saw farmers taking a second job off the farm. They would often,
was that to supplement the farm's income?
Yes. Oh, yes, and they would often call it doing public work. That didn't mean working for the government. It just meant working out in the public.
Or whatever,
yes. And, say in a factory or maybe for the county or something like
right.
that. So that was public work. And so even then, it was really hard to participate fully in the consumer economy just from the money that you were making off farming.
That makes so much sense. We have some photographs here from I guess previous years working in the Appalachian Teaching Project,
Yes.
and so we want to take a look at these and so you can tell apples.
Yes.
Those are nice apples. Where do these apples come from? Were these farmed in Unicoi?
Well, you'll notice the name on the apple crate, Willis Apples.
Yes.
Yeah. And there were a lot of orchardists in Unicoi County in the past, apple orchardists. Apple orchards did really well in the mountainous parts of the county.
Ask that.
Yes, yes. And so especially, not just in this area, but especially down in southern Unicoi County around a community called Flag Pond.
Yes.
There were a number of orchards. It was just an area that was noted for its apple raising. Now we see that history today in the Apple Festival.
Yes,
that's
that's what I was just going to say.
Yes, yes. But the number of orchards has really decreased. We just don't have that number anymore that we used to.
That is unfortunate because those are pretty.
Yes.
And then we have here, oh, that's so pretty. What am I looking at?
Okay, so what are people doing in terms of farming in Unicoi County today?
What are people doing in terms of farming in Unicoi County today? Flowers.
This is one example. That's correct. This is a greenhouse owned by the John Paget family. It's in Irwin. And it is a greenhouse that specializes in a variety of floral crops. And for example, last year when we interviewed them, we had to schedule around their poinsettia planting because they were getting ready for Christmas. So poinsettia planting was very important. So, but you can see other bedding crops there. So one thing that's possible is a specialty operation like a greenhouse.
Yes. Doesn't that kind of like, well, we'll come back to that. I'm going to ask that question here in a second. We have blackberry blossom.
Yes. Now,
farm and campground.
Another thing that some people are doing in the county who are interested in maintaining agriculture is agritourism. And so the people at the Blackberry Blossom Farm have an agritourism and ecotourism.
I hope they farm blackberries.
Well, they have a lot of berries,
okay.
yes. But, I mean, you know, they're kind of wild around here, too.
Yeah.
But so people can come there, they can camp, they can have a wonderful woodsy experience there. And so what they've done is to try to go into ecotourism. But they also grow a variety of crops, they and produce things like jams and that sort of stuff. So that's one thing, a small operation like their campground.
That's nifty. I like that. That's pretty. I want to go there. I don't camp much, but then we have Johnny Lynch Farmhouse Gallery and Gardens. Ooh, with barbecue lunch.
Yes, yes. So Johnny Lynch, Mayor Lynch, Johnny Lynch is mayor of the town of Unicoi. And he also is a person, he's an artist, and so you'll notice it says here Studio Gallery.
Yes.
But he took his farm. Johnny started off as a farmer. He had a diversified farm, hogs, cattle, and other things in just outside the town of Unicoi. And as suburbia crept down his way, it became more and more difficult to maintain a farm there. So what the Lynches decided to do was to again, go with agritourism. So they've got a little restaurant there. They've got gardens that you can go and visit, and that's how they've tried to use agriculture to continue as part of their own life.
My question that I was thinking about asking after we were looking at the nursery was if farmers in Unicoi County have not been able, if farming isn't as an economic plan hasn't necessarily maintained its viability, it seems that I don't know if we're solving the problem by taking what we do farm and then creating these little tiny niche businesses. Like I would imagine that a greenhouse or the Lynch Studios or whatever else, or the jams by the Blackberry Farm would be clearly more expensive because of the production costs associated with that than if I went to Walmart and bought myself a jar of blackberry preserves. And so are we really resolving any economic challenge by having these little niche businesses around little tiny farms?
Well, that is always a question, and it's one that my students will sometimes raise. And I think the question there is, are these catering to an elite market and sort of forget ordinary people who have to buy?
Live in Unicoi.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are several ways that people who are trying to do small-scale, local farming, sometimes that's a buzzword that's used too, local farming, several ways that they try to deal with it. At the various farmers markets, for example, a lot of them take food stamps. So if a person needs food stamps, they can use those food stamps to buy fresh produce.
Right.
Yeah. So are the products more expensive? Well, yes, they are.
Right.
But does it really work out for a family of consumers to be more expensive than, say, eating lunch at McDonald's every day and eating supper at Applebee's every night? And the answer there is no, it's very competitive in terms of cost in that respect.
Are local little businesses, local farms, are they doing enough business in terms of volume in order to maintain, to be sustainable at this point?
Well, I shouldn't say that. Mayor Lynch, Johnny Lynch, and his family support themselves off of their operation. So some are, some aren't.
Are the ones that are not, is it a matter of not yet, or is it that we are looking at a situation where perhaps their business plan for a small farm isn't ultimately viable?
I would say it's a little bit of both. Yes, a little bit of both.
So in the end, from your Appalachian teaching project, what in the end are, let me ask a different question. There's work to be done in Unicoi County about, especially or in Appalachia in general, about understanding farming and its impact on culture. And so the goals that you all had for being in Unicoi County, do you think that you're achieving them? In talking to the farmers and understanding culture and understanding the impact of the decline of the farming industry on both the economy and the culture in Unicoi County, do you think that your ATP is doing useful, important work? I certainly think it is, but are you achieving any particular outcomes?
I think that the way I ask that question is Unicoi County getting anything out of this?
Is Unicoi County getting anything?
And I think we are producing things that will be useful to Unicoi County. I think especially the record that we produce through our interviews, because when we interview someone, it's an hour to an hour, sometimes even a 2-hour interview that we do. Documenting its culture is really important in terms of understanding who's there, what they're and what they're doing. So I think it does fit in with their desire to do cultural preservation. We did an earlier program on craftspeople and artists, not just in Unicoi County, but in Northeast Tennessee. There's a real hope in Unicoi County to start a sales facility like what's the one in Virginia, Heartwood, or Tamarack in West Virginia. There's a hope of starting a sales facility in Unicoi that will sell local crafts and also local agricultural products. Yeah, so local products in general. So my hope is that the work that we do will contribute to documenting that culture.
I hope so too. I think you're doing really important work. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. We have been talking today with Dr. Tess Lloyd and about the Appalachian Teaching Project. We hope that you will join us next time on Spotlight ETSU.